Once again, I said this last week, if you want to get the book, you can get the book. Almost all the information that I'm going to be talking about comes from a book called The Epic of Eden by Dr. Sandra Richter. You can get a book, you can follow along. We're going to go basically a chapter at a time. If you don't want to, if you don't like reading, that's cool too. Don't get the book. Don't spend the money. I'm going to talk about most of the stuff that's in it. So Sandra Richter is way better than I am, but if you don't want to get the book, that's cool. Let's recap. What did we talk about last week? Anyone want to give me a synopsis of what we shared and what we talked about last week?
What's that?
Brothers.
Brothers? Yeah, we did. We did. What else did we talk about? Redemption. Yeah, that was like the big nugget that we walked away. That the Bible is really God's story of redemption, of God rescuing, redeeming us, of God rescuing lost children who were lost to an enemy that they couldn't defend themselves against, and brought back into the what?
Family.
The family, or the Beit Av, right? Brought back into the Beit Av. And so that's the synopsis of what we talked about last week. Last week we also talked about the dysfunctional closet syndrome. Anyone who was here last week, for the folks who were not here last week, what is this about?
I kind of look like this is called. I say that.
Yeah, Caroline?
You want to put stuff away and deal with it later.
Yeah, like go ahead.
Your junk drawer or something.
Yeah, so we all have closets or drawers or cupboards or garages, or maybe it's your glove compartment in your car or whatever, where you just throw stuff. And you have the idea, you have the intention, you're like, I am going to do something with this someday. Like I'm going to clean it up at some point in someday. But if you're anything like me, you never get around to it. I was just reflecting on my own closet today, and the stuff that is in there that I need to deal with. I actually just dealt with some stuff about a week ago. I got rid of 4 shoe boxes. Okay, yeah, thank you for the applause. I don't buy a lot of shoes. I hardly ever buy shoes. So it wasn't like I went on a spending spree and I got 4 pairs of shoes and then I got rid of the boxes the next day. No, this was like years worth of boxes, of just empty boxes. Why? Because you never know when you're going to need a good box. Am I right? Man, am I right? Okay, yes. So
Amazon box.
I have Amazon boxes are good ones too. So I got rid of these boxes, but also in my closet are old cell phones. I think there's an iPhone 3 in there. I'm not sure. And if there is, there's probably the box that it came in, because you never know if you're gonna have to take it back a decade later. And so there's boxes in there. I have an 80s outfit in there. Because I did an 80s event with my youth at my previous church, and I've done one here, and so, it makes me look like Judd Nelson, right, in the Breakfast Club. And so, you never know when an 80s party is going to break out. And so you just need the 80s outfit. And so that's in there. I have a collection of hospital scrubs. I've never worked in the healthcare industry, okay? But at my previous church, we would do this service project in inner city Memphis, where we would do roofing work for houses in ill repair. You weren't allowed to wear shorts because you would burn yourself on the shingles on the roof. But you don't want to wear jeans because it's 120 degrees on the roof. And so everyone got the scrubs to wear. I still have them for no good reason, zero. I'll sometimes wear them when mowing, and Marcy just looks at me and is like, oh, gosh. I'm a bit of a hoarder. Stop it. Leave me alone. Anyway. So that's sort of my closet, but many of us treat the Old Testament in the same way. Like, we throw stuff in there and, like, we're going to deal with it someday. We have this collection of people. We've got Adam and Eve. We've got Noah. We've got Bathsheba, Jonah. We've got Samson. What are some other Old Testament names? Job, Esther, Delilah, David, Samuel. Yeah, so we've got all these names. We all have a ton of names we can come up with, and we just, what do I do with this? And so we throw it in the closet. Like, I'll deal with that someday. Like, I'll make sense of it someday. We've got this collection of stories. We've got this flood, and we have this whale, and we have these wars, and we have these golden calves. I love the golden calf that, like, when Moses came down and he found out they were worshiping a golden calf, so what did he do? He ground it up and threw it in the water and said, "Drink that. You stupid heads." These random stories, people dying when they touch the Ark of the Covenant because it's going to fall off the cart. It's like, oh no, don't let it fall. Oh, I'm dead. Like these random stories. And then we've got this collection of laws. You know, we're going through the series on Sunday morning, the 10 Commandments. And so you've got, don't kill, don't have idols, but also things like how to perform a sacrifice. Here's how you kill the animal, and here's what you do with it. Like, I wish we had Dr. Reginald Higginbottom here to take us through some of that stuff. If you didn't see the commercial for it, that means nothing to you. But, here's how to kill the animals. You've got all these plagues coming down on Egypt, which, in my mind, is evidence that God has a sense of humor because of the frogs. I love that so much. Like this morning, I went into the bathroom on our main level, and like a spider skittered across the floor. That one didn't walk out alive. But I just think about, like, what if that was a frog? Like, one of the plagues was frogs, and so they got up, and there were frogs everywhere. You go to get a bowl out to pour some cereal, and frogs, and you get in bed, and frogs everywhere. I think God was just giggling when he did that one. But we've got all these random stories, all these random laws, all these random people, and it feels like a bunch of random stuff that we throw in the closet, and we'll deal with it later. And so what we're hoping to do with this class and moving forward is to give you some hangers, to give you some shelves, to give you some stuff for your closet, to make some organization about it. And it's going to take the form of real people in real places or real space through real faith. Real people, real places, real faith. But before we get into that, let's talk about real time. Real time. We are going to organize the story of redemption that we started talking about last week through 5 major areas. 5 major areas. A number of years ago, Bell Labs, research arm of the U.S. telephone company, they were tasked with finding out the best number of digits to use in a telephone number. Okay? So they contacted a Harvard professor who conducted a study who found that the perfect number is what? 7. Give or take 2. Okay, so anywhere from 5 to 9, somewhere in that range. But 7 is the perfect number so that people can remember them. Now, some of you probably couldn't tell me your spouse's phone number because we don't have to memorize it anymore.
Yeah.
But I bet you could tell me your best friend's phone number from when you were a kid. Like, because you memorize that stuff. We can memorize 7 digits. If you can memorize 7 digits, then you can memorize 5 names and 5 storylines to go along with them. So those are like the main shelves that we're going to use to structure the Old Testament, okay? So first of all, before we get to that, let's start with a timeline. Okay, you're going to be quizzed on this, so like nobody is writing. I'm not sure why you're not writing. Write this all down. No, but it starts in the Garden of what? Eden. It starts with the Garden of Eden. We move forward to Noah. Then we've got Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then they go down into Egypt with Joseph and the tribes because there was a famine. So they go down into Egypt with Joseph and the tribes. Then we've got the Exodus. What's the Exodus?
Leaving Egypt.
Leaving Egypt, yeah, there were slaves in Egypt. They took off. They get the law on Mount Sinai. Their desert wanderings through there. Joshua and the conquest era of the judges. Samuel, Saul, David. There's a lot of stuff. Okay, we're not gonna get quizzed on this. And some of you, as I started going through it, were probably thinking, like, when he goes through this, maybe if I slip out right now, he won't notice that I'm gone. And I wouldn't blame you. That's part of the reason why we want to boil it down and make it simple. We want you to have good shelves that you can make sense of. That's why we're boiling it down to 5 names in 5 eras. It's not an exhaustive list of the Old Testament. We're not going to cover every story of the Old Testament. And again, the story of the Old Testament, as we talked about last week, is not an exhaustive world history. Okay? So we're going to give you 5 names and 5 eras that we're going to, hopefully, will help you make sense of the Old Testament and God's story of redemption as it's interwoven through Scripture. So let's get to the names. Who do you think the key names might be? Just toss out names, and you may be right, you may be wrong. Adam. Wow, that was hard.
Noah.
See, y'all are looking at the first letters. You're cheating now, Todd. Todd, I know I gave it to you. I shouldn't have put the letters on there. Okay, y'all are too smart. Yes, okay. Okay, I learned. Don't put the first letter on. Adam. Who's the next one? Noah. Abraham. Moses. David. Good job. So it starts with Adam. Okay, Adam, Genesis chapter 1 through 5. Adam, Genesis chapter 1 through 5. The story begins where? Garden of Eden, right? Starts in the Garden of Eden. God, in all of his creativity, he creates this place of beauty, this place of wonder, this place of peace, this place of perfect communion with God, where Adam and Eve could be in this perfect relationship with God. And really, he gave them everything they could have desired. Like Adam and Eve, everything, like it's all yours, like all the trees. Okay, there's the one. But all the rest of them, eat whatever you want. You can have whatever you want. It's perfect. And they could have stayed there in this perfect environment. But they chose autonomy instead. They chose to not listen to the God who created everything, including them. And they ate from that one tree, and what happened? Kicked out. Like booted out of the Garden of Eden, angels at the entrance with flaming swords saying, you ain't come back in, right? And so they were booted out. And so right here, just imagine what they're experiencing now. The pain, the chaos, the confusion, the guilt, the shame. They had it all, and they gave it up. Right here is where the story of God's redemption begins. It doesn't start with Jesus. It starts here in the Garden of Eden. If Adam and Eve had not disobeyed God, we wouldn't have needed a rescue plan. It wouldn't have been necessary, right? But because they do, the rescue plan gets set in motion. Now, Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden, when did it take place? A long time ago, in the beginning, but when?
6,000 years ago.
6,000 years ago. That's a popular answer. Okay? That is a popular answer. Actually, we don't really know for sure. Okay, we don't really know for sure. Again, if you, I don't know if you can see the writing on that, but it says Eden, and below it, it says question mark, because this is not a dateable event. Okay, we don't get to dateable events until we get to the story of Abraham. Now, people have tried, and this is where you got 6,000 years. Okay, people have tried. There is a guy named Bishop James Ussher. He was a 17th century scholar, and he did some work, and he concluded that the birth of creation happened on October 23rd, 4004 BC. So the anniversary is coming up. I know you'll celebrate appropriately. Fireworks are appropriate on October 23rd. Anyway, but here's the thing. Dateable events don't come along until the story of Abraham. Early folks, Bishop James Ussher, who tried to date things like this that were before dateable history, they had limited information regarding how the ancients viewed time, how the ancients viewed genealogies, how genealogies played into measuring time in kinship-based societies. So the genealogies are a bit skewed. Like, we look at time, we look at genealogies, and we think, well, we can calculate, because we can look at the genealogies and go, oh, a generation is, what's a generation? 30 years? And so we can do the math and calculate it chronologically. But when the ancients did genealogies and things like that, numbers and exact dates were not as important to them. Okay? I was showing you my genealogy last week, and since I did a lot of work on it, I'll get as much use out of it as I can. Okay? So when we look at genealogies today, we look at them, we calculate them by time. So I have blown my dad's mind just a number of times, because we'll be talking about some random ancestor, and I'll go to my Ancestry.com app and I'll go, oh, your grandpa, the original Robert George Fitzpatrick, my dad is the third, died on December 17th, 1953. And he'll be like, whoa, how do you know that? And the standard answer between us is computers, because those answer everything, right? Ancient genealogies were different. They were different. They could flex, they could bend based on what the person was trying to communicate. The person who's writing down the genealogy, what they were trying to communicate. So if they were trying to, if the person who's doing the genealogy was trying to communicate a particular story about a family line, it could look one way. But if they were trying to communicate a specific theological truth, it could look completely different. Okay? It's based on what, even if all the people are the same, but based on what they were trying to communicate. So, let's do this. This side of the room, if you have Bibles or a Bible app, I want you to look up Matthew chapter 1, verses 2 through 17. Matthew 1, 2 through 17, right here over this way, these 6 tables. This side of the room, I want you to look up Luke chapter 3, verses 23 to 38. Luke 3, 23 to 38. This side, Matthew 1, 2 through 17. Both of these are the genealogies of Jesus. So they should match up, right? They should, okay? Someone over here who is able to read nice and loud and willing to do so. Carolyn's like, nope, not me. Matthew chapter 1, verses 2 through 17. Dave, and I'm going to have you do this, but as you do it, on this side, I want you to look at your version of the genealogy. Luke chapter 3, verses 23 to 38. Okay? Now, as he's reading his version, if
my mind, I can't pronounce half
I
these
know.
things.
that's okay. I'm going to teach you an important trick about naming names, okay?
All right.
But as he does, when you see a discrepancy, I want you to raise your hand. Okay? Simple job? Okay. Dave, here's the important thing you need to know about saying biblical names. Say it loudly and with confidence, and everyone will think, "Oh, I didn't know how that was pronounced." Yeah. So, do you need the microphone?
You tell me.
Oh,
I'll
yeah,
start
yeah.
using it.
There you go.
This is New King James Version.
Okay.
So, Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac begot Jacob, Jacob begot Judah and his brothers. Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez
My
begot
wife is the only one raising her hand. Right? You're supposed to raise your hand when you see a discrepancy. Okay, go ahead. Keep going.
Perez begot Hezron, and Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Amminadab. Amminadab begot Nahshon, and Nahshon begot Salmon.
Okay, stop there. I'm not going to make you read all
Yeah.
17 verses. You're doing a great job. I mean, unless you want to keep teaching.
No.
Yeah, okay, good job. I was going to have this side then read Luke chapter 3, but I won't put you through that. There is a lot of, I didn't see many hands going up, so you're terrible at following instructions, okay? You had one job, raise your hand when you hear a discrepancy. However, I did see a lot of confused looks. Like, what the honk is he talking about? Well, one of the discrepancies is that one of them goes forward and the other one goes backward. We're not going to go through all of them, okay? That's one of the discrepancies. But, and here's the thing, some people would look then and have looked then at these genealogies and go, see, you can't trust the Bible because they're different. There's discrepancies there. They should match up. But again, that's our mindset. That's our culture. Our culture says it's based on chronology. And so the dates should match up in both of them, right? And so we believe that. So that's, do you remember what that's called when we believe that if it's true of our culture, it's true of other cultures? What was that called? Ethnocentricity, right? And we also believe that our way is better than other ways. And what was that called? It's called canonizing culture. Like, because it's my culture, it's better than all the other cultures. And so we think that. But the way that they viewed genealogies was different. And so in these writers' mind, the work of genealogies was not so cut and dried. There could be multiple explanations for the two differences. I'm going to give you just a couple of those, okay? Matthew, his reflects a primary lineage. Who did the primary lineage go through in a family structure? The male, right? No offense, ladies, you didn't matter in the lineages of those days, okay? Luke takes Levirate laws into effect. You remember what those were from last week? If I have a brother who is married, he dies, what is my job?
Take his wife.
Take his wife, have a child, so that his name can go on and so that he can have an heir. So Heli and Jacob in the one genealogy may have been half-brothers. Heli died before having a son, so Jacob bore a son with Heli's wife. Okay, so Matthew follows the biological lineage, the blood lineage. Luke follows the legal lineage, taking those Levirate laws into effect. Matthew records Joseph's lineage. Joseph was who? Jesus' legal father, right? And the lineage goes through David's son Solomon. Luke records Mary, who's Mary? Jesus' biological blood relative through David's son Nathan. So Solomon, Nathan, both David's sons. So it went through, it comes from the throne of David. Both of them come from the throne of David, and so he's eligible to be the what? Messiah, right. Another way that it can be explained that they're different, Matthew leans into the title Son of David, suggesting that he's in line to be the Messiah because he's connected to who?
Jesus.
David. He's connected to David's throne. But Luke leans into the title Son of Man, suggesting that he's related to all of us by his connection all the way back to Adam. All the way back to Adam. So Matthew presents the image of a kingly Messiah who's going to save his people. Emphasis on kingly Messiah. While Luke presents Jesus as the last Adam who would succeed where the first Adam failed. Okay? And then you have the discrepancy that we talked about last week, the obvious distinction that Matthew makes a conscious decision to emphasize women and the women that he did. You remember those names? Mary and Rahab and Ruth, Bathsheba, right? He makes an intentional decision to put those women's name in the genealogy. Women's names don't belong in a genealogy. He put them in to make the specific declaration that Jesus came to save who? Everybody. Everybody, not just the Jews. So as 20th century Old Testament scholar R.K. Harrison wrote, the aim of such genealogies was to establish the general, keyword, general line of descent from given ancestors. And this objective was in no way impaired by the omission of certain generations as long as the line was being traced properly. All members of a particular line were not necessarily equal in importance. And because of that principle, as well as for other reasons, certain names and generations could be omitted from family lists without prejudice to either the intent or accuracy of the content of the genealogy. So if I'm looking at my genealogy and I'm trying to communicate something with my genealogy and Uncle Cletus doesn't fit in, I don't have an Uncle Cletus, but if I did, he doesn't really fit into the narrative that I'm trying to tell with my genealogy, it's perfectly acceptable in this era to leave that name out. It's not against the rules. It's perfectly acceptable in this mindset and in this culture. So the genealogies were intended to generally, keyword again, generally communicate the chronology, but more importantly, to highlight certain figures in the family line and certain themes to go along with them. Does that make sense? Do I need to pause? Everyone good? Good. Awesome. So let's get into the key figures, the key names. I was going to ask you again, hey, can you possibly come up with the key names? You've already done that, so cool. So the first is Adam. We've already highlighted him a bit. The next key figure is whom? Noah. Is it whom or who? Who or whom?
Noah.
Who is the, yeah, but is it whom or whatever. Anyway, it is Noah, Genesis chapter 6 through 11. Like Adam, we can't put Noah at a specific time in history. Okay, we can't, he is before datable time. Okay, so we can't say, oh, it happened in such and such year. But I'm not going to assume everyone knows the story of Noah and the flood. I'll flesh it out really quickly. Humans are being jerks on earth. And God says, I need to start over. And so he takes Noah, saves Noah, his wife, his 3 kids, their spouses, saves all the animals. My daughter asked me the other day, how are the dinosaurs on there? I'm like, don't ask questions. Anyway, so maybe they were babies. I don't know. But anyway, takes the animals on the ark. There's a giant flood, wipes out all of humanity except for Noah and his family. Waters go down. And so the flood is kind of the great divider in history. There's the Adamic time, the Adamic age, where it's before Noah, and then you got from Noah to the present age. So with the story of Noah, we see God recreating the earth that had been broken, and we look ahead to God saving all of humanity through the line of Noah's offspring, a guy named Shem. Okay? So that is Noah in a nutshell, the Noah era. Next is Abraham, Genesis 12 through 50. Genesis 12 through 50. Now with Abraham, we make a shift because now we can get into datable history. Because we can look at archaeology, we can look at other historical events and whatnot, and we can get into datable history. So around 2000 BC, Abraham's father, a guy named Terah, leaves his home city of Ur and migrates to Canaan. And so this is an area that we know actually existed from other archaeological findings, other historical writings. We know this existed. It's not some made-up era. Some people will say somebody just made up the Bible. No, there's other evidence that says that this actually was a real place with real people. Now in 2004 BC, just a few years before this, there was basically this civilization collapsed, and it could be the reason why Terah, Abraham's dad, took him and his family to move his family. So once they get to Haran, Abraham separated from his family to bring his own Beit Av to Canaan. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. You might remember last week when we talked about the Beit Av, that might have to separate either because the patriarch dies or because the group just gets too big and they have to separate into multiple Beit Av. So Abraham splits off. His offspring grows to 70 people in all. How many of you host Thanksgiving? How would you like to host 70? That would not be awesome. I had a friend back in Missouri when I lived there. When he would go for his family Thanksgiving, there were 125 people there. So, yeah, so that was super fun. But he had 70 people, and it's several generations of offspring from those 70 people who traveled down into Egypt where they lived in peace for a time until Exodus chapter 1, verse 8. In which we read, it's kind of a haunting verse, Exodus chapter 1, verse 8. It says, "A new king came to power in Egypt who didn't know Joseph." Now we're going to get into Joseph's story in just a little bit, but he was an offspring of Abraham. And so we can sort of see the tide turning with this verse. Everything's cool, everything's copacetic, everything is great. Joseph is a big deal in Egypt, but now it's many years past that, and the new Pharaoh doesn't know Joseph, doesn't know his history with Egypt, and so it's about to get real, and it's about to get real fast. So as you know, the Israelites are enslaved by Pharaoh, and God hears their cries and sends a deliverer in Moses, right, the Prince of Egypt, if you will. Exodus through Judges, this is God's man for God's hour. This is when God gets to show off, and God's going to use, bless you, God's going to use Moses as his hands and his feet and his mouthpiece. Bless you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So Moses grew up in Egypt, but he was forced to leave Egypt. Why did he have to leave Egypt? Killed some dude. We're about ready to talk about, he killed an Egyptian who was beating a fellow Hebrew, and he buried him in the sand. We're about to, on Sunday, talk about the commandment, thou shalt not kill. And I think it's fascinating that the guy who brought those tablets down from the mountain, that's one of the commandments, and it's Moses, who not too long before this had just killed another man.
No, he did it before it was against the law.
Yeah, wasn't a problem. Yeah.
Correct, but it's still, it's fine now. It was fine when Cain killed Abel. Everything is fine. Yes. So interesting theology going on right now. Anyway, we're gonna push on. He didn't say no. So anyway. So he's wandering, and God calls him for an impossible mission, which was what? Save them from slavery in Egypt through a series of miraculous plagues, including the frogs. He ultimately leads the people out, and at Mount Sinai, this group, which had been a number of tribes, separate tribes, is now basically turned into one nation. They have to wander for a time. They have to wander for 40 years, but finally, Moses gets to hand off the baton to Joshua to take them into the promised land, the land promised by God to who all those years earlier? Abraham. Promised it to Abraham all those years earlier. So Moses' timeline will include the Exodus, the wanderings, the conquest and the settlement of the land, and the period of the Judges. Now we're going to dive into each one of these stories in greater depth in subsequent weeks. Okay, just to let you know, we're gonna do, I think, like a week on each individual. Bless you. It's like all the allergies tonight. Okay, so who's left?
David.
David. Okay, David. 1 Samuel to 2 Chronicles. Now, many of you know this young shepherd boy. He took on the giant Goliath with a couple of stones and a slingshot. His loyalty was the thing that set him apart and made him great. Now, before David, there's not a centralized government for God's people. It's still largely ruled by tribal leaders living very separate lives within their tribes. But the people start to look around and see that all the other nations have a what? A king. They're like, man, that looks cool. Like, look at this crown. We should get one of those guys. We want a king. And God finally gives in. They're also tired of just getting the tar beat out of them by every other nation. And like, we need a king in order to make sure that doesn't happen. And so their hope is that the king will end their vulnerability. Their first choice is a dude named Saul. When you think about Saul, think like Chris Hemsworth, the guy who plays Thor. Like, tall, ripped, good looking, like that's Saul. He looks the part, but he was a train wreck. Okay? So Yahweh removes him and anoints David as the new king, and this is when the dynasty begins. It starts with David. Jerusalem is conquered. It's made the capital city. The tabernacle is brought to Jerusalem. The tabernacle is like a temporary worship space that they used in the desert. They bring that to Jerusalem. They make plans to build a temple. And then David becomes the king of Israel. It's kind of like the Ohio State University. It's the standard by which all the other ones are measured. David is the king against whom all the other kings are measured moving forward, either in a good way or a bad way. Follow the Lord just like David did. He did not follow the Lord like David did. They're all compared to David. And so from 1000 to 586 BC, which is the fall of the southern kingdom, which we'll get into in just a second, a child of David is on Jerusalem's throne. So there are your key figures. There are your 5 eras that's going to give you the shelves to make sense of the Old Testament. Again, we're not going to cover all the names. We're not going to talk very much about anymore. Okay, we talked about him last week. We're done talking about him. All right? We're going to talk about these 5 names: Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, and David. Now, at the outset, we said that we're going to talk about real people in what? Real places or real space, another way to talk about it. Based on the moans I heard when I started the game, and you found out we were going to answer questions about geography, most of you are like me. Geography is not my jam at all. Okay, not a big fan. Going back to my school days, I'm like, dude, why do we have to memorize all of the states and their capitals? This makes no sense. Real quick, informal poll. Capital of Kentucky. Do you pronounce it Louisville or Louisville?
Frankfurt.
It's pronounced Frankfurt. Come on, people. Maybe you should have paid attention in geography class. Anyway, if geography is painful, why study it? Well, because if it affects the people in the story. It affects the decisions that they make. It affects the plot line. For example, my wife and I, we have about a perfect 3-hour triangle with our extended family. I have aunt and uncle and cousin that live up west of Cleveland. Her family lives mostly in the Marietta area, so it's like this perfect 3-hour window. If we go up north, it's 3 hours. If we go from the one family to the other family, it's 3 hours. Go back home. Perfect 3-hour triangle. So, years from now, when someone is reading the story of my life, because someone's going to write it, and they read, Fitz and his family drove to see their family every major holiday. That would communicate something. That would communicate they're a good family that gets along with each other, they get along with their extended family, their family is important to them, it's important for them to be with their family on the holidays. Now, years ago, we lived in Missouri, and I was looking for a job in ministry, and I was on a ministry job site, and I found one, and I was like, this is it. Like, this is the job. It's perfect for me. It like all of my strengths, it matches up with my strengths and abilities. This is the perfect job. There was a problem. It was in Anchorage, Alaska. A solid 3-day drive. Like, not we're going to drive 8 hours for like 3 successive days. No, driving nonstop for 3 days and nights. So if I had moved there, first of all, I probably wouldn't be married anymore. But if I had moved there, she would have stayed with me. If I had moved there, and then you read the story of my life, that I drove home to visit family every holiday, that would communicate more. That would communicate he really likes his family. And he had a lot of money to spend on gas. And his church gave him so much vacation time. And he really liked driving, which I do not at all. So it matters that Sinai is out in the middle of nowhere. It matters that Jerusalem to Jericho is a short drive, but your ears are going to pop when you take the drive because of the elevation change. Jordan River is neither deep nor wide. Mount Zion is not so much a mountain as a small hill. It's only 2,500 feet in elevation. The highest point in Ohio is 1,500 feet. And we're not particularly mountainous, right? So while it might not be everyone's cup of tea, it's important for us to understand geography so that we can better understand the story. Now, there are 3 major regions that we're going to focus on. Mesopotamia, which encompasses Assyria and Babylon, 2 world powers. I think I've got this flipped around. That should be Canaan, which encompasses Israel and Palestine. And then Egypt. Mesopotamia, Canaan, and Egypt. All 3 of these land within an area known as the Fertile Crescent. Did you not get it? You want me to go back?
Yes.
There you go.
Oh, Egypt didn't have anything, just Egypt. That's why we didn't look at it.
All of these land within an area called the Fertile Crescent, which is this area right here. And what made this fertile area, what made it fertile was what? Water, abundance of water. The Tigris, the Euphrates, the Jordan, the Nile rivers, they're all in this area, and it provided what was necessary for life in this otherwise desert region. So there's desert all around it, but because of these rivers, there's a lot of life flowing there. So the first notable area was what again? Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, that is this region right here within the outline. It comes from 2 Greek words which means between the rivers. Between the rivers. So because of this area's ability to sustain life, it becomes host to some of the most ancient and civilized civilizations. And the first of those is considered to be Sumer in the south. We first see writing developed there in 3200 BC. And some historians go so far as to say that Sumer was actually the cradle of civilization. The Bible pretty much suggests the same thing, that this is where the story began. So when we read in the story of Adam and Eve that the fact that the garden was placed in the east in Genesis chapter 1 verse 8, where the Tigris and Euphrates might be found, it's clear that the biblical writers were thinking about Mesopotamia when they were writing the story of the creation of everything. They were thinking of this area right here. Mesopotamia is also the setting for Noah's flood. Setting for Noah's flood, because the southern areas where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were very low setting, this region often experienced massive floods. Now, that could raise a question. Some of you might be saying, I thought the flood covered the whole world. Maybe it did, but I'm going to say that maybe it didn't. I know some of you are like, liberal, it's fine. I'm okay. We can agree, we can disagree, it's fine, I don't mind, but there are plenty of historians, biblical scholars that would suggest that it wasn't a worldwide flood, but that it was a regional flood that happened in this region of Mesopotamia. Okay? So, either way, want to believe a worldwide flood, you want to believe a regional flood, either way, it's fine. We all love Jesus. All right. Also, in addition to that, the Ararat Mountains are just north of Mesopotamia, and Ararat is where Noah's Ark came to rest after the flood. So Mesopotamia is the setting for the flood and for Noah's Ark. And so the earliest accounts of the biblical story, Adam, Noah, land here in this first important geographical area of Mesopotamia, and it stays here until Abraham receives the call to what? Go. It says go. God says go to a land I will show you, which is not helpful. But, you know, he does, and he leaves that area. And so he travels to another major urban center called Hebron, which is in our second notable geographical location, which is the land of Canaan. The land of Canaan. You see it noted there, kind of this way on the map. This is an area that's later going to be known as Israel. Israel will be known as Palestine. The significance of this region is that it serves as a land bridge between two major civilizations, Mesopotamia and Egypt. You got Mesopotamia on the one side, you've got Egypt down here. Canaan is the land bridge between the two of them. So it was in the larger area's best interest to control this area as both a trade route and a military buffer zone. Okay? The good news about this being a land bridge would be that the people in there would be exposed to all the latest technologies. Because anytime trade happens between these two major regions, it would have to go through Canaan. Right? A drawback to that is they would regularly get the tar beaten out of them as the superpowers would roll through chasing some enemy. Okay, so it was a really chaotic region. Now Abraham, he spent much of his time in this area, as noted by the arrows there, as a nomad as he was wandering, particularly in several cities named Shechem, Bethel, Jerusalem, Hebron, and Beersheba. And so it's interesting that, I didn't click it, there it is. You can see him right here in Canaan. This is where Abraham hung out. And so it's interesting that Abraham spent a lot of time in this location that would be later the future heart of Israel. Next, we move to where? Egypt. And so many of you probably know how Egypt came to be important in the biblical narrative. It happened because of a guy named Joseph. You might remember him as having a Technicolor Dreamcoat, right? As a result of his Technicolor Dreamcoat and the favor of his dad and kind of his own arrogance, he gets sold by his brothers into slavery, because that's what brothers do. So he sells them into slavery in an area known as Dothan. And again, I don't know if you can see it there, right below the word C, it says Dothan. It makes sense that this would happen, because this is an important highway between these two regions. So it makes sense then a caravan looking for Semitic slaves would buy Joseph in that area and make him a slave. And so, as you probably know, Joseph becomes a slave in Potiphar's household. He gets thrown in jail, then he gets elevated to the second most important person in all of Egypt. And as a result, Yahweh is able to reunite Joseph with everything: his success, his reputation, his wealth, his spouse, his children, even his father. And then for 400 years after that, Jacob's offspring are going to reside here in Egypt until the whole Moses leading them out of slavery deal. Now, when Moses left Egypt, when they escaped from slavery, it would have been a much shorter route to take to go the northern route, which, well, I'll show you here in just a second. It would make a lot of sense to take the northern route, but Egypt's military would have been too strong for them. So Yahweh led them instead east and south into no man's land. And they find themselves, bless you, they find themselves at Mount Sinai, which is right there at the bottom, again, down in no man's land. And this is where the concept of covenant with Yahweh is established. We're going to talk about that next week. This is where they first become the people of God, receiving what? 10 Commandments, or the law. The law, the bigger form of it is the law. Israel repeatedly fails in keeping the covenant, which leads to a generation of wandering. But eventually Moses is able to hand off the leadership to Joshua, and Israel begins to make preparation for the conquest of the Promised Land. So we go back where? Oh, wait, you only said there were 3 places. We're going back to Canaan. We're back in Canaan again. So the tribes of Israel return to Canaan as the Promised Land. As we read through Joshua and Judges, Israel's going to wrestle, is going to fight with neighboring peoples for the ability to rule in this area. And one of the things that results from this is their desire, again, we talked about already, to have a what? A king, right. David becomes that king. And David's military talent, followed by Solomon's administrative talent, sets the stage for what's called the United Monarchy. So Israel is one nation at this point. Okay? It doesn't last long. It doesn't last long because civil war tears the region apart under David's grandson Rehoboam. And this results in a divided kingdom. A northern region and a southern region in 931 BC. So you've got Israel in the north, ruled by a series of kings and dynasty, and Judah in the south, ruled by the Davidic dynasty. And the temple in David's dynasty continues in the south in Jerusalem and Judah. And then we return to... Nope, good try. You had 2 shots. Picked wrong. Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia again. In 722 BC, the Mesopotamian dynasty of Assyria, a world superpower, captures Samaria, which is at the time the capital city of the northern kingdom, and drags off the inhabitants to the far reaches of the Fertile Crescent. 130 years later, the southern kingdom of Judah suffers a similar fate, with the attackers now being Babylon, right. So for nearly 2 generations after that, the survivors live as exiles in a foreign land, but the remnant of the faithful in the southern kingdom and Babylonia will return. And in 538 BC, that day happens. That day of promise comes, and those known as Israelites or Jews are released to go home. And this is considered the birth of the modern religion of Judaism as we know it. And it's into this community that the Messiah is going to be born. Did you get it? You get it all? Somebody want to repeat that back to me? Anyone at all?
So if you're reading the Jewish version of the Old Testament, the Torah, is that right? Does it start there, or does it go back? I thought Abraham was...
It goes back all the way, but this is Judaism as we know it, as a religion, starts happening there. So, name the 5 characters. That got really muddy, but I'm just gonna trust you that you got Adam and Noah and Abraham and Moses and David. And what are the three regions? Mesopotamia, Canaan, and Egypt. Well done, well done. Now, you might be thinking, that's not really what I signed up for, Fitz. I didn't sign up for this class for a geography lesson. Okay, it's not going to be geography every week, but it's important to know these things. It's important to give us the structure, and that's what I'm trying to do, is give us the structure so that we can look at the Old Testament and go, oh, that makes sense. Oh, that's why they keep getting beat up on, because they're in this region between Mesopotamia and Egypt. Oh, that's why they went south and east, because Egypt otherwise would have wiped them out. Like, this stuff is important, and it feeds into the story and understanding the story better. And so this, again, we're going to dive into each one of these eras in greater depth in coming weeks. Next week, we're going to talk about the concept of covenant, which I'm super excited about that. Any questions before we go? Make it an easy one, okay?
Do they believe that the Egyptians came from that migration through Mesopotamia? Is that where the, like Sumer, is that where the Egyptians come from, or do they not know? You know what I mean? You said civilization kind of started there. Did they grow and follow that path, then, or did the
Fantastic question. I said make it easy. And, like you could have said, what was the first name? Adam. I could have answered that one. Yeah, no, I
Egyptians
don't.
are very different from most Africans.
Yeah.
And I just wondered
Yeah,
if that's where
it's
they
a good
came
question.
from.
I don't have a good answer for that. I apologize. No more? Sweet. Awesome. Terry's like, I'm done, man. Dude, my brain is soaked. Okay, cool. If you didn't mark your name off on the attendance sheet, please do so. If I could get your help, there is a bag of pens over there. If you can make sure all the pens make it to that bag, and there's a tub for the markers. If you can throw away excess papers, make sure your name gets on an attendance sheet. Grab a snack for the road. I'll see you next week. Bring somebody with you. I love you. Have a great week.
You too.